Next, we're going to look at a special technique that sometimes works when you have four terms. If you look at our first one here, 2x plus 6 plus ax plus 3a, you'll notice there's not anything that all of the terms are divisible by. So what we're going to do, this is a special thing that only works when it's four terms. We're going to do what's called factoring by grouping. We're going to group the first two together, and we're going to group the last two together. And we're going to factor out the greatest common factor from each of those groups individually. If we only look at the 2x plus 6, both of those are divisible by 2. And if we divide those by 2 to see what's left, 2x divided by 2 is x. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now let's do the same thing with our next group, the ax plus 3a. We can see that there's an a in both of those terms. So we're going to factor out an a from this next group. And we divide them both by a to see what's left. Ax divided by a, the a's would cancel out and you'd just be left with x. 3a divided by a, the a's cancel out, you're left with plus 3, like that. Now take a look at what we've got at this step. If we look at the first part and the second part, we notice that both of those parts have x plus 3 in them. So what we're going to do to get the final answer, we're going to factor that x plus 3 out to the front. Now from the first part, when we factor out x plus 3, we would have 2 left over. There's a plus in the middle. From that next part, when we factor out x plus 3, we have a left over. And this would be our answer. If you take the time to multiply these together with the FOIL method, you'll get the same thing that we started with. So the way factoring by grouping works is, if you look at all four terms and there's nothing you can factor out of all four of them, then you try to group them together two at a time. Factor out the greatest common factor of each group, and then if you're lucky, you'll end up with the parentheses like we had in this case that you can factor out of both of those remaining parts. Let's take a look at another example. This one I know can be tricky at first. The more examples we practice, the easier it will get. So let's try this next one. Here we have 10x squared minus 12y plus 15x minus 8xy. All right, so looking at this one here, let's see. Here, there's not anything that they're all divisible by. All right, so let's try grouping this way. And let's see if we can factor it like this. Here, from the first two terms, it looks like we could factor out a 2. And when we do that, dividing them both by 2, we would be left with 5x squared minus 6y. Next, from those last two terms, it looks like there's an x in both terms. So we'd factor out an x. When we do that, 15x divided by x is 15. 8xy divided by x, we would have minus 8y. Now this one is different than our last problem. You'll notice in this case, the parentheses aren't the same. We've got our first parentheses is 5x squared minus 6y. Our next parentheses is 15 minus 8y. So that didn't really help us. We weren't able to finish the factoring. If you get something like this, where you try to do the factoring by grouping, but you end up with different parentheses, don't give up. It's not done. What you want to do is use this little trick of switching the terms in the middle. So I'm going to switch these two and then try it again. So I'm going to put the plus 15x and the minus 12y, I'm going to switch the places of those. Notice I'm not switching the values. It's still a plus 15x and a minus 12y, I just switched the locations of those two middle terms. So if you try the factoring by grouping, but you end up with different parentheses, try switching the order of the middle terms and then do it again. Let's take a look at what happens when we try that here. And now, when we look at our group of the first two terms, they're both divisible by 5 and x. So we're going to factor out a 5x from each one. 10x squared divided by 5x would be 2x. 15x divided by 5x, we would just have 15 divided by 5, which is 3. Now here, looking at the next one, we've got a 12 and an 8, which are both divisible by 4. And we also have a y. So we're going to divide both of them by 4y. Here's another trick, though, that's very important to remember when you're doing factoring by grouping. If your group starts with a minus, you need to make sure that you're factoring out something negative. So here, instead of just factoring out 4y, we're going to factor out minus 4y. So to see what's left, because we're factoring out a minus 4y, we divide both of those terms by minus 4y. So again, when you're doing this factoring by grouping, if the second group starts with a minus, factor out a minus. So now, negative 12y divided by negative 4y, the y's would cancel out. Negative 12 divided by negative 4 is a positive 3. On the next term, negative 8xy divided by negative 4, the y's cancel out. Negative 8x divided by negative 4 would be a plus 2x. Now let's take a look at what we've got. 2x plus 3 and 3 plus 2x, those actually are the same. When it's adding and you change the order around, because addition is what we call a commutative operation, the value doesn't change. 5 plus 3 would be the same thing as 3 plus 5. If it's minus and you change the order, they're different. But when it's adding and you change the order, they're the same thing. So we can go ahead here and factor out the 2x plus 3 from each part to the front. And from the first part of it, we've got a 5x left over. From the next part, we have a minus 4y left over. So wow, this one ended up being pretty complicated. Lots of steps to it. You want to get to where you remember these steps. Learning how to do factoring by grouping really well will make some of the factoring problems that you'll run into a lot later on much easier. If you can get good at this now, one of our later sections is going to be much easier. Let's take a look at one more example of a factoring by grouping problem. Here we have 2xy minus 3y minus 8x plus 12. So looking at these, there's nothing that all the terms are divisible by. So we're going to try factoring by grouping. From the first group here, 2xy minus 3y, it looks like we could factor out a y from both of those. So we're going to divide those both by y. 2xy divided by y is 2x. Minus 3y divided by y is minus 3. Next, looking at 8x and 12, those are both divisible by 4. And remember something I said a minute ago. When your second group starts with a minus, you need to make sure you factor out something that's a minus. So here, we're going to factor out not just 4, we're going to factor out minus 4 from each term. Anytime your group starts with a minus, you need to factor out something negative. Negative 8x divided by negative 4 would be 2x. Positive 12 divided by negative 4 is minus 3. And look, we're lucky. The parentheses is the same in both parts. So I put that parentheses at the front. From my first group, I have a y. From my next group, I have a minus 4. So 2x minus 3 times y minus 4 would be the answer. Practice this factoring by grouping, remember, which is what you use when you've got 4 terms. It will make something we're doing later on much easier if you get good at this.